Hey everyone, Mr. Happy here, and in this video we're going to be taking a look at an interview that was conducted between Tetsuya Nomura and the Japanese media site Famitsu regarding all the Final Fantasy VII news that we had last month. You know, we had Intergrade, we had First Soldier, and Ever Crisis. All of those are present in this interview. Now, before we go any further, this interview was originally in Japanese over on Famitsu, and thus we needed someone to translate it to English, and it should be no surprise that Audrey, Aitakemochi on Twitter, did a translation for this just today. So we're going to include the Twitter thread in the description of the video. That also has a source to the original Japanese interview itself on Famitsu. And of course, Audrey runs a business in Japan, Aitakuji, which specializes in bringing Japanese exclusive goods worldwide. I actually ordered something from them today. It was a Taito Prize Alphino and Alice from Final Fantasy XIV, and I'm looking forward to getting that in the future. Not sponsored, by the way, just every time we borrow one of her translations for this, I feel like I should probably give her a shout out for it. So this interview has some interesting details. Some of it just confirms certain questions that the community had regarding Intergrade and DLC with Final Fantasy VII Remake altogether, as well as clarifying what the business model is for Ever Crisis. That's been a major question that ever since the Japanese site went live last week, people have been pretty sure we knew what it was, and now we have a certain idea of what it is. Now, first in the interview, or at least first in the translated section, is stuff regarding Final Fantasy VII Intergrade. Now, the first question is about the new character, Sinon, and his design, how they decided to make him a little more manly than initially intended to see how Yuffie would actually interact with him. And then also about their actual combat and how you don't actually control Sinon in Intergrade. So he kind of acts as an assist character for Yuffie. She gets some unique attacks that she can execute at certain times. You can have him either get specific orders from Yuffie where you can tell him exactly what to do, or you can let him play on his own. So there are some options that almost kind of maybe a little bit remind me of Final Fantasy 15 when you had guest characters like Aranea, but it seems to be more tailored to the way that Final Fantasy VII Remake's combat actually works, and the relationship between these two characters, Yuffie and Sinon. Now, on top of that, they confirm there's going to be new materia, there's going to be new monsters in Yuffie's DLC. That really shouldn't come as a surprise given the trailer showing us things like Deep Ground and Vice. But the big question that's answered in this interview is, are there plans for DLC after this? Because you and I are all thinking the same thing. Oh, there's episode Yuffie, then they're going to do episode Vincent, episode this, and episode that. And I don't doubt that in the future versions or in the future parts of Final Fantasy VII Remake that they probably will do something like Intergrade, not necessarily upgrading to a new console, but more specifically giving us that kind of string along point, something that holds us over until we actually get to the next part. And that's kind of echoed here. So originally, I'm just going to read word for word. Nomura said, "For the sake of separating the PS5 upgrade with Yuffie's added parts, we had to call this part DLC in quotes. However, we had already decided to create a 7 Remake PS5 version, but we did not want it to mean that we are specifically creating DLC as well. As a result, we really have no plans for any other DLC. With Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade, we are able to adjust to the PS5 environment, which makes for an easy transition to development for the next installment. The roadwork we had laid out to complete the entire story takes priority, and if we are to ever add DLC, it will not be until everything has been done." So basically just saying that I had suspected that Yuffie was not something they initially planned to do for DLC, and that a part of it was just to branch us into the next game. They were already developing assets for it. They had assets left over from the original game. I had not really considered that maybe they just also wanted to work in the PS5 environment and get used to developing in it, and making something like this Yuffie story for Intergrade would be a part of it. I hadn't really considered that, and it does make a lot of sense. Now, despite that, he does specifically say, after everything has been done, and I'm assuming that just means that in between parts, again, we might see more DLC, but only once the game itself is actually complete. And not like, oh, we're going to make this, and then here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They're not going to do what they did with Final Fantasy 15, basically. And it's good to get some degree of confirmation, although, of course, we're always going to be skeptical because we know plans change. We know even if they were planning on doing it, they probably wouldn't just say it in an interview like this. So I'll take it with a grain of salt, but it does kind of line up with what my expectations were with episode Yuffie. Still unfortunate that it's a PS5 exclusive, and that if you own the original on PS4, it's basically only going to get you something if you happen to get a PS5 somehow. But it is what it is, and I'll be covering that when it actually comes out. Now, moving on to the second part of the interview, probably the least important part. Final Fantasy VII, the First Soldier. Listen, I'm sorry if you are excited, if you're looking forward to a mobile BR, if you're at least going to give it a chance. I just have the lowest of expectations for this. It's not my genre. It's really just not something I'm interested in. And due to something we talked about last time, and something that's present in the final part of this interview, I'm even less excited for it than I normally would be. And we'll cover that when we get to that specific point. And really, all that they talk about is the reason they're making a battle royale. And it's because they're trying to reach people outside of the genre that already knows Final Fantasy VII. He even admits that Final Fantasy VII is a huge name. It's the odds of them reaching an audience that doesn't know about it, or at least isn't interested in it, is always going to be kind of tough. But they're going to try to enter a popular genre with First Soldier. Those that play it may not know about Final Fantasy VII or have played Final Fantasy before, and that this might be a jumping in point for them. It sounds very noble on paper, but again, I just have a hard time of being excited about it. I mean, that's the thing. He even says they don't want to release a lukewarm title. They really want to make sure it's good. And you know what? Maybe it is. For people who really enjoy that genre, I can't say that this won't be good. I can't say that genre isn't good either. So it's just a lack of personal interest for me, and I'm sorry if that comes off in my reporting in something like this in an interview. But it is a new genre for them, as he says right there, and I probably won't be taking a dive into First Soldier. And the rest of it's just, do you plan for a beta test? Yes, there will be one eventually. Are the 3 players in the top left screen your comrades? Yes. There are job icons that represent a fist, a sword, and a staff, but can you also change jobs during battle? As you might have guessed, each player can decide their own job, referred to as a style in the game, so that's what those icons mean. Each style has its own power and skills, and you can set this during each battle. There's also an advantage to stick with only one style, and we'll explain more about that at a different time. So I'm assuming that if you dive enough into a single style, as you play with that style, you'll get better at said style. You'll level the job, you'll earn job points. That's what I'd assume just upon reading that. And again, I really do applaud them for at least trying to incorporate major Final Fantasy elements in something like a battle royale. Listen, I'll root them on it. If they pull this off and it's fun, good, great, grand, wonderful. But again, I just can't be too excited about that. Best of luck, though. None of it sounds bad. I just kind of wish it wasn't this genre. And then there's just some comments here at the bottom. Most of my concerns center around the gameplay, and I personally put a lot of weight on the feel of the game. It's important to find a good balance for what Battle Royale players want. One of the game's core planners, producer Ichikawa, is a hardcore Battle Royale gamer, and as such is very keen to hearing feedback from everyone and making adjustments. I've given my own amateur feedback, and since he is well versed in the genre, he's able to answer the ideas I give him with exactly how they can be represented in a Battle Royale. I'm able to talk to him without any hesitation. Regarding the graphics, we're working to ensure the visuals for the smartphone do not disappoint. Again, it sounds like they've got a good head. Everything in this sounds good, as much as I'm not excited. All of these answers are good answers. They're good, they're insightful, and good luck. That's it. I'll leave it at that. You don't need to hear me talk about it much anymore. You know what my stance is on it. This is the part that I am most interested in. Final Fantasy VII Ever Crisis. The second remake will be getting of Final Fantasy VII before the first one is even done. So, you mentioned the game will be released in chapters. Will the chapters be free and include story? And what are the in-game transactions? First question, most important question. Thank you, Famitsu, whoever put this interview together. Your questions have been great, and they're getting the answers that we want precisely. And we now know Ever Crisis's chapters will be free. They will release every so often, and you will go and you will earn the characters as you play through. The in-game transactions are weapons. Now, I am a seasoned mobile game player. I've played City Opera Omnia, I've played my Brave Exviuses, I've dabbled in pretty much all of the major Square Enix titles at some point or another when it comes to mobile games, and even ones that haven't released here in the West. I prefer strict weapon gachas over every other one. Personally speaking, my favorite mobile game is the City Opera Omnia, and that is a weapon gacha. So I'm already a little hopeful since they are going with a gacha, that is going to be the correct call, hopefully. It does mean that all the chapters, all the game, all the basic story stuff, you usually don't need to dive too much into gachas to do story-related content, unless you're doing it on high difficulties. That's usually how mobile games work. So for those people who just want to replay the old games in Ever Crisis, you probably won't have too much of a trouble, despite this being a weapon gacha. You'll be able to get special weapons or new costumes that do not exist in the original game, and this will add to the experience. So it's going to be monetized very similarly to The City Opera Omnia is what it sounds like. So if you're used to that game, then maybe that gives you hope, because a lot of us really enjoy the gacha in that game compared to a lot of the other games. Very generous, I guess I should say. but the rest of the story will be free. I wasn't sure if they were going to go this route. It's good to know that for certain. What are the lengths of each chapter like? Can you give us an example of how long the original Final Fantasy VII story will be? Another great question for getting an insight into the scope of things. The original Final Fantasy VII will be condensed into about 10 chapters. I got to give it to Nomura also. He has exact answers for all this stuff, and that's also pretty good. To elaborate, it will take 3 chapters to escape from Midgar. The other compilation titles will probably follow the same chapter pacing. So we can assume that Ever Crisis will probably launch with just Midgar. Very, very similar to another remake that we've played. And that, a month from then, they'll release another chapter, then another chapter, another chapter. And then when they finish the base Final Fantasy VII, we know they're going to be doing Advent Children, Before Crisis, Crisis Core, a bunch of other things. And there's even another question in here that gives us more insight into some of the other contents that we can expect. And that is actually the very next question now that I look at it. Will Final Fantasy VII Ever Crisis have any original episodes? Yes, it will. And that's kind of a surprise because we didn't think they'd be expanding on Final Fantasy VII's world all that much. But we kind of already knew this because a month ago when we were talking about all this, it was made mention that Ever Crisis would have a section where you play through First Soldier, the Battle Royale game. So the other game doesn't really have a whole lot of story because it's a Battle Royale first. And the story for the Battle Royale is in Ever Crisis. It's so weird. But at the same time, I'm glad because it means I don't have to play Ever Crisis for any of the story beats. And I'll be largely experiencing those through whatever Ever Crisis actually has planned for that. There will be some other characters, younger versions of a certain hero, which we know is Sephiroth, as well as Shinra employees and even other characters who will appear in the next installment of 7 Remake will be present as well. We'll give you a deeper understanding of characters who are not talked about much in the main story. All right, cool. Don't have to play. All I see there is I don't have to play First Soldier. That's all I see. During the announcement trailer, we see characters fighting the Scorpion Sentinel at the Maka reactor. Since Aerith is also with them, does that mean it's a battle that takes place outside the main story? They do confirm here that they will have event chapters where basically you can take on really strong versions of the stuff that you fight in the story. So special dungeons and battles that take place outside of the compilation. So you can use whoever you want for battles like that, and that's not really too much of a surprise. Will there be any rearranged music? Yes. So OST lovers out there, you're going to get some new tracks of some of your favorite Final Fantasy VII ones, as if some of the remake ones, Airbuster, as if those weren't already so good. Are there any parts of Ever Crisis that you were particular about? Which is an interesting question. I'm rather particular about having all the games fit the style of the original Final Fantasy VII, where the map features mini stylized versions of the characters, while battles had the full versions. This rule wasn't present in the other compilation titles, and the battle systems are all different. For this game, they're going to make sure all the titles follow this format while also preserving the essence of each game. It's vital to have an interesting battle system, so I was very strict with my views on this. While we have heard that many want to play each compilation title on a console instead of the phone, Ever Crisis will not be a substitute for that. Instead, the game is designed so that anyone can pick it up and enjoy the various titles of Final Fantasy VII freely. Few things to unpack there. One, we now know that the gameplay is consistent, that basically the OG format of the original Final Fantasy VII will be applied to the movie, Before Crisis, pretty much everything that's going to be available through this title. Another thing is that they say this is not a substitute for a console version of these games, for a substitute for other versions of those games. So basically not 100% ruling out the idea of remasters or I guess even remake equivalents of some of those other titles that are available in Ever Crisis. And let's be honest, they'd be fools to do it from a monetary standpoint because they can churn that butter, put all that milk in, just milk the whole thing, churn that butter, make that cheese, if you know what I'm talking about. And finally, the very last question here at the bottom, which I noticed is cut off actually a little bit. I'll fix that here in a second. Didn't notice that was going to be cut off down there. There you go. Final Fantasy VII Remake is now free to play on PlayStation Plus, and it seems like the hype for a remake continues this year. So this is kind of a fluff question, like, yeah, give us your outro kind of thing. We'll be busy with the series, not just this year, but next year and the year after that. So each year will be intense. Yeah, when you make 2 mobile games and you're working on the second part of a remake, that's definitely going to be busy. First off is 7 Remake Intergrade, which will be out on June 10th. Also, lift the ban on certain streaming restrictions greatly, which also applies to Intergrade as well. So I've had time to think about that. I can tell you as somebody who had the game a week early, was able to produce some YouTube videos on it, who was able to stream it day one, I never ran into a single issue. So I'm assuming this has a lot to do more with first-party streaming through things like PlayStation and Xbox, where they usually like block cutscenes or certain music triggers things that basically shut off streams. Like the stream will say you cannot display this, and it'll kind of go blank for anyone that's watching. So it's for the people who really just stream on those first-hand systems. Also, I'd imagine that in Japan itself, there's a lot more issues in regards to the music and the contents because it's where it was developed, and it probably the laws over there are a lot different. So I'd assume that we probably won't see much of a difference here on the west side of things, but that change is very likely to be good for Eastern content creators in particular. And Nomura likes watching live streams. I hope he's never tuned into one of mine. Not because I don't want him there, but because I am a sailor in streams. I am not the cool, calm-headed Mr. Happy that you see here on YouTube. I am the hot-headed, yelling the F word every 2 seconds kind of streamer. I apologize for that. But anyway, just, all right, that's it. That's the end of the interview. I don't have anything to lead off from that. So thank you for watching this video. Be sure to like, favorite, subscribe, and share. Check out the original Twitter thread, which contains the original Famitsu interview as well as the Aitakuji website in the description of the video. Be sure to like, favorite, subscribe, and share, and stay tuned for more information regarding Final Fantasy VII Remake. I'll see you all in the next one, and until then, take care.